Imagine you're 60 years old with $2 million saved up. You might be starting to ask yourself, can I retire? How much can I spend comfortably without constantly worrying? Well, that's the exact situation the couple in today's video found themselves in. They had done a great job saving and investing, but they hadn't put a plan in place to answer these key questions. In this video, I'm going to walk you through their retirement plan, looking at actual numbers and the steps involved to get them to a place to see what's possible. And the key about this framework is that you can use it whether you have $500,000, $2 million, or more saved. The details may change, but the steps involved don't. I'm Nick Morrison, a retirement-focused financial planner and founder of Morrison Wealth Advisors. All right, let's start by meeting our couple, Jack and Mary. Jack has an IRA with $750,000 in it, a $200,000 Roth IRA. Mary also has a $750,000 IRA. They have $200,000 in a brokerage account and $100,000 in a high yield savings account. They have a house worth approximately $700,000 and no mortgage. So they have a total net worth of $2.7 million, but they have $2 million, right, excluding the house, available to fund their retirement. Until now, their focus has been to save what they can, invest wisely, and focus on long-term growth. But as they've reached their 60s, their focuses have shifted to how do we protect what we have and use it to enjoy our remaining years. Whenever I build a retirement plan, I always start with a simple question. What do you want your retirement to look like? That helps shape how much income we need to plan for. Here's what came out of that conversation with Jack and Mary. They want to be able to maintain their current lifestyle without second guessing every decision. They want to be able to travel more in their 60s and early 70s while they have their health and energy. And they want to be able to help their grandchildren, namely help with college and possibly pursue home ownership sooner than they might be able to on their own. So we start the planning process by quantifying what these goals might cost. In their case, we started with the essentials. This is usually the easiest to add up. Things like your grocery bill, utilities, property tax, homeowner's insurance, and in Jack and Mary's case, their Netflix subscription and NFL Sunday ticket. Jack was a Panthers fan. Mary was originally from Pittsburgh, and it was the only way that she could watch the Steelers in and out of market. Then we added in discretionary expenses. These are things that they could cut back on if they wanted to, but things that they want to spend money on a regular and recurring basis. In Jack and Mary's example, the items that they were spending the most on were things like eating out and their golf dues. This allowed them to play golf. It allowed them to play pickleball and attend other social events that they very much enjoyed. So for Jack and Mary, when we add these expenses up, this came out to be $5,500 a month. So their core spending needs were $5,500 a month. Now, I always recommend spacing out healthcare expenses, right? So this $5,500 did not cover healthcare, but healthcare will change once you retire, whether you retire at 65 and you roll right into Medicare, or in Jack and Mary's case, they were 60 and they needed to bridge the gap through a combination of COBRA, then the Affordable Care Act or ACA, marketplace insurance, and then eventually Medicare. But the reason I suggest splitting this off and itemizing healthcare, this tends to be one of the biggest expenses in retirement, and healthcare costs tend to rise faster or have a higher inflation rate than your other expenses. Okay, so for Jack and Mary to continue their healthcare plan through COBRA, it was going to cost them $900 a month in premiums, and we estimated roughly $200 a month in out-of-pocket costs. So $2,000-ish, we rounded up to $2,400 just to have a little bit of a buffer. So we're estimating $1,100 a month in healthcare cost. That will last for 18 months, and then they likely will either need to go on private insurance or go through ACA, the marketplace. Right now, that's a little bit up in the air around premium credits and subsidies. So there's the possibility those costs could change. We need to wait and see. So we assumed that those healthcare costs would continue to go up based on inflation, based on the $1,100 a month. And then once Medicare kicks in at 65, we assumed annual expenses for healthcare of $14,120, or $1,177 a month. This would cover Part B premiums, Part D for subscription cost, a Medigap coverage, and out-of-pocket cost. Again, we'll need to refine this and talk to a Medicare expert around choosing a plan when the time comes. But we wanted to help budget for this cost. Okay, so as we start to build out their projected cost in retirement, we started with the core expenses, and we added in some projections for healthcare. They had shared that they want to spend on travel more so in those early years through their 60s and early 70s. So for Jack and Mary, they wanted to budget $18,000 a year for travel. And they're thinking maybe 3 trips a year at about $6,000, or perhaps they might go on, 2 trips, and spend a little bit more lavishly, or they might, spread it up, but felt like $18,000 a year and then adjusted for inflation would allow them, to do the type of travel that they look forward to. They're still not sure how much they want to contribute towards their grandchildren, but to get started, they wanted to explore putting $5,000 in each of their 2 grandkids' 529s, or starting a 529 with $5,000 each, and then they will contribute $200 a month every month thereafter. It is something we're going to revisit, but again, this is something that they want to ease into, and this is what they felt the most comfortable with. So in Jack and Mary's case, being able to help their grandchildren, it was important, but it was more of a wish list item, right? It wasn't a priority versus their primary questions. Can they retire? How much can they spend without constantly worrying? So for now, we shifted the conversation into income, right? We have a good understanding of what their expenses are. Now we're shifting into income. So with Jack and Mary, we looked at Social Security. We looked at what they would be able to collect if they took it early, what it would look like if they took it at full retirement age, and what if they delayed. Now, in looking at those projections, they felt the most comfortable taking it at 65. They felt like waiting a little bit was worth the added benefits and the security blanket that would provide, but they did not feel it was worth waiting all the way to age 70 to earn as many delayed credits as possible. So in their case, that came out to $40,000 a year that they'd be getting, that Jack would get, and $35,000 that Mary would. In addition to Social Security, Jack and Mary were going to be living off of their portfolio. Because they were planning, or they wanted to see if they could retire at 60 and collect Social Security at 65, they were going to be relying more heavily on their savings for the first few years until Social Security kicks in. As we can see in the report here, in 2030, when they're 65, they're not going to be collecting the full $70,000 because they're not starting right away. But then as that kicks in, you've got more income, you're taking less from the portfolio. In this situation, we have the living expenses, which are a combination of those core expenses we talked about plus healthcare. The other expense is the travel. Had to mark that separately because, again, they wanted to assume more spending for travel for the first 15 years of their retirement, and then they wanted to project that expense cutting back. Again, we're using 2.5 or 2.52% inflation for their core basically all of their expenditures except for healthcare. In healthcare, we assumed 4.5% inflation. Also to note, for the retirement portfolios, we assumed 5.5% growth for the retirement assets. We assumed basically the cash would be keeping up with inflation at 2.5%. And then we assumed the brokerage account was going to get a little bit more growth. In Jack and Mary's case, their brokerage account is more growth oriented than their IRAs. They're not wanting to do as much adjusting there because of the tax ramifications. So again, we assumed slightly more growth in the brokerage account than we did the IRA. But again, that's a starting point. We don't know exactly what type of growth they're going to get. We don't know what type of fluctuations are going to happen. And there can be a very big distinction between growth that occurs in a straight line versus what happens in reality, where you can have a really good year, you can have a really bad year, and choppiness can really impact that. But again, this is a starting point to visualize the possibilities we can stress test this in a later step. Okay, so if we look at these baseline projections, we can see no projected shortfall. You can see assets are projected to continue to increase during their retirement. Again, keyword projection. But initially, this tells me they have enough gas in the tank to be able to cover their lifestyle, to be able to travel the way that they want, and that there's opportunities to consider funding their grandkids' college and even potentially some sort of support with buying a house. As we can see in this number, options for meeting needs. Although they don't need this right now, they might be able to increase their living expenses. So a couple different data points telling us that there's likely some extra room in the tank to help explore options to provide for their grandkids. But before we dive into that, when planning for retirement, there are key risks that are most likely to get in the way of being successful. And it's important that we account for those. So spending, that's probably the biggest one. You know, if you assume you're going to spend $5,000 a month, but you're really spending $10,000 a month, that very quickly can erode your nest egg. So having decently accurate spending, accounting for inflation, as we've seen in those charts, even inflation at 2.5% can really compound over the years. That was one of the biggest surprise when I started seeing these numbers early in my career, just seeing what inflation can do to those expense numbers. So accurate spending estimates, accounting for inflation, longevity, right? The longer you live, the more you need your nest egg to grow and support you. So accounting for adequate longevity, market risk, right? So we talked about some of the assumptions that we're making in this chart. But we all know the market does not go up in a straight line. It's very much like a roller coaster. There can be bad periods. There can be bad years. You need to have an investment strategy in place that can help you weather that storm. And so one of the things that we look at to help address that when we're starting to make investment decisions is having an adequate cash buffer, right? Having whether it's between cash, money market, some sort of equivalent, or high quality bonds or bond funds, having a certain amount set aside that could help you survive the storm. When having that conversation with Jack and Mary, they wanted to have 5 years. 5 years worth of their planned expenses in cash equivalents or bonds. So we started the investment allocation by building out how much cash and what type of bond portfolio they were looking at. And then with that, they felt comfortable having the rest of their portfolio allocated to growth using diversified mutual funds and ETFs. Building this cash buffer or this war chest between cash and high quality bond investments gives you something that you can withdraw from in a down market, or more so a significant down market, so that you're not having to sell your growth investments at a steep discount. Hopefully you have enough saved, you can pull from that, and then as the market starts to recover, you're giving those growth investments the best ability to recapture that growth, and then you can always realign things once the market settles down. Now, the other way to spot check your retirement plan to ensure you're on track, to make sure that it's sustainable, is looking at the withdrawal rate. So as you look at your projections, right, your potential assets, what you're planning to take out, looking at, is it a sustainable withdrawal rate? You know, the rule of thumb has traditionally been 4%. There's some math that supports slightly less. There's some arguments that support slightly more, but generally if you're in that 4% to 5% space or less, you're usually pretty comfortable. Again, as you start to go above that, you might need to further tighten the belt in down markets, but having a combination of a game plan to account for when the market goes down, having a healthy, sustainable withdrawal rate, just helps to strengthen that retirement plan. In Jack and Mary's case, the first year withdrawal is expected to be around 5.8% until Social Security kicks in. Then their withdrawal rate drops to a projected 2%, stays at a very healthy level And then in their mid 70s, their minimum required distributions start. They're not expected to need any income beyond that, leaving them in a very strong spot. So in Jack and Mary's case, the projections look very strong. Feel very comfortable saying that they can retire. They can afford to maintain their lifestyle. They can afford to travel the way that they want to. And there looks to be plenty of opportunity to pursue support for the grandkids, right? And that can then dovetail into what is that going to look like? Do you do more now and let it compound? Do you do it later in life, right? You kind of work through some of the details of what that support might look like. This also dovetails into other conversations, right? Do they want to spend more? Do they want to revisit what their travel plans are? If they eventually, get some part-time work or there's other things, right? You can add in some of those details, but those two main questions but the main point is they are in a position to retire now if they want to. They have a good idea, that they can maintain their current lifestyle. They can travel more in their 60s and early in their 70s, and they have the ability to provide financial support to their grandkids. If you found the video helpful, click the subscribe button on the screen, or if you want to have a conversation about your situation and if you're ready to retire, please visit us at www.morrisonwealthadvisors.com.